What's up, guys? Welcome back to today's episode of Just Gonna Craft It. My name's James, and I'm here for another cool tutorial. Today's episode, we're gonna work on a cool little travel case out of something I just had laying around and wasn't making use out of. So when I first got into paints, I bought the Reaper miniature paints first. It was just quick, affordable, and it seemed cool. I was very overwhelmed, and this is the way I went. And if you went with this direction, you might have bought both sets. There was the basic learn, and then there was a layer up, and then they came with some additional packs, which I bought one. So I have 3 of these things, and I only use really one of them. So these two sit around, and they don't really do anything. And with the potential of ReaperCon in September, I understand if it gets canceled, but I am anticipating getting excited, and I'm thinking about how I'm going to travel with my paints and make it easy and convenient, but also makes sense, especially with how I use my miniature, how I paint my miniatures. So, looking into these things, these actually come as actually a really cool paint holder. I actually don't really like my Reaper miniatures. After a while, there's some good colors, but sometimes their coverage just isn't good, and it frustrates me, and that's just my opinion, but the case itself, I love. It is a great case, but I don't need this many. With this is 32 with 4, so that's 36 paints I can hold. I don't really need to take 36 paints anywhere. So today's project, we're going to go ahead and cut this in half. We're going to use this space, we're going to utilize that to hold miniatures. But instead of just having a box, I'm actually going to make it so I can put my painting system in here, which involves magnets and bottle caps. I'll link a tutorial video in the right here, and that will show you how I do my miniature sets. And yeah, this will just be my system. So we're going to have brushes here, a couple of cubbies here, and I might keep these for varnishes and washes that I'm going to have with me. So I'll have 16 paints, 4 or 2 washes and 2 varnishes, and some paints and my miniature. So without further ado, let's work through the process of how we're going to do this.
So since this is something that you can replicate, I'll go ahead and get some measurements. Since the area will be a square, I do make it 5.5 by 5.5 inches. I end up taking a little bit of that size off later, but I wanted to make sure I could cut into it and not have the anxiety of cutting a new piece. Next thing we do is go ahead and cut the section of the foam that we're not going to need. I make that a square, and it's as simple as a hot wire cut or a box cutter. I test the foam piece out and get an idea of what this is going to look like once everything is in. And I think that's a pretty sufficient amount of space. Even if you don't want to do how I put the pieces, you can absolutely make this a cubby and put basing material, miniatures, whatever you would like. The first piece I cut is the base, making it 5.5 by 5.5. Again, it was too large, but I was going to go back and cut it later. Next, I'll work on the walls of this section. That way the foam isn't being hit over and over, and it's a little bit more protected by that strong foam. I do measure these to be about 2 and 7/8 inch high, is what the foam measured. So I cut the pieces a little bit higher than that. And with the angle, I just kind of make it up. It's not that hard. And once the angle was what I wanted, I went ahead and used it as a template to cut the second piece. Um, the second piece will have to be a little bit longer because of how the joints will intersect. And that's what I realize here. So I go back and I cut probably just about a 1/4 inch off, and it worked perfectly. I put that piece in and it looked great. So I cut the top, that way I could close the lid instead of that foam sticking out a little bit. Once I had that, I wanted to get the base sized up so that way it would fit in and I could start working on that. I do go back and make quite a few cuts. Again, I didn't have a way to really measure the bottom, so I just went ahead and cut little by little. And I go ahead and test it in the case to make sure it lines up pretty well. And it does. So I just hop to the other side and I cut off the same length there, a 1/4 inch, and it squares up pretty well in the case. So the next part that needs to be cut is that corner. So this one I just make some aggressive straight cuts and then I come back with a more curve and it works well. And I think it fit this time. So as you can see, it was a pretty easy process to size this up. So the next thing I'm going to do is make sure that the borders line up well, and I'm going to write letters on them because one is longer than the other. So I want to make sure they line up later. This is the system that I use for my painting. I am thinking about making a video later, but a quick overview is I take soda cap bottles and washers and I use that on top of a old paint bottle that has magnets in the lid. Um, the pivoting point is a tack that fits in the washer hole, and that way I can rotate the miniature while I'm painting it. So the next thing here, I'm going to line up all the pieces and get an idea about where they should be sitting. I didn't make too many measurements. This part I really eyed. And I just drew a line where I thought the middle was. And once I was satisfied, I came back with a ruler and I made the straight lines. I wanted to make sure that each piece fit, so I went ahead on the curved piece and I, again, eyed it until I was satisfied. And once I was satisfied, I just kept moving things along, and it looks like it's going to fit great. So the next piece is going to be the tacks. The tacks are going to be the pivoting points that will hold this the miniature in that spot instead of moving around. So I just take a pencil and on the cross marks, I poke a small hole. I come back again and I get more aggressive until the majority of the mechanical pencil went in and it looked good. So I tried the tacks out. And it looks like it fits pretty well. Now I sped up and I poke the holes on where the magnets are going to go. These I use about 3mm or 5mm. I'll check and put that in the description with the link of the magnets I used. And the magnets didn't fit well from the holes I poked, so I ended up getting a sculpting tool with the ball on the end. And I stuck it in the hole and rotated it to widen it. But I was still worried about the tacks popping out. So I came back with some blue painter's tape and I put it over to protect it. Now, unfortunately, when I tested it, it didn't seem to hold very well. And I wanted this case to be able to be shooken around, banged around, and my miniatures not fall off. So I decided to go ahead and put 2 sets of magnets per tack. So I go through the same process using the small poke and then tapering up. And this time I just used hot glue, wipe away any excess. Don't worry about making this look messy because we're going to cover it with blue tape later. Once I had that row, I went ahead and cutted the strips to cover those. Again, making sure that in the longevity, these magnets aren't going to get pulled up with me pulling the miniature holder up and down. So I did want it to look a little bit more uniform, so I ended up making the cross sections as well. And it turned out looking pretty good. With a matte black, you barely notice the individual lines. And again, this is just to make sure that it stays strong. And as you can see, as I put the miniatures on, the second magnets really helped. In the tap test, only one fell off, and in the shake test, they all held pretty well. So I'm pretty confident this will go in a case and hold my miniatures without rolling around the case. So let's finish up the tape. We're going to cut the rest of them and just make them have the cross. And then we'll apply black Mod Podge. The black Mod Podge is just going to assure that the foam will stay nice and stiff and that over the years this will hold up well. After drying for a minute, I put some black matte acrylic paint on it, and that will just help make it look uniform in the case. It's pretty tough, and I'm pretty satisfied with moving on to the actual artwork that's going to go onto the case. Now, this is a great time for me to just thank you for watching this video. I love doing these crafting projects, and posting them on the internet is a lot of extra effort added on to the project itself. So you just simply watching this makes me feel like it was worth it, and I hope I can inspire you to do something cool like this. So we're going to get the miniatures out of the way now, and we're going to go ahead and clean up the desk because my desk has accumulated a lot of scrap parts. And once it's all cleaned up, we're going to get the case on here and pull the sticker off, which luckily Reaper does not use a glue that leaves a residue, so it comes off clean and doesn't require too much cleaning. Now I begin looking and imagining what I want on this, and I'm imagining something galactic. So I look up a YouTube tutorial, paint one off the screen, and I go ahead and put it on my case. I'll link the video that I reference to paint this, but the gist of it is using blue, white, and red on your brush in sections and using a rotation to help blend those colors and create a mixture between blue and purple, just like you would imagine in the galaxy clouds. Now, once that's done, I'm going to go ahead and put some white so there's some variation. And now it's time to add the stars. To do that, I'm going to take white paint and get it a little wet and flick it with my finger. I do only want to do little stars, but to give me some big stars with depth, I'm going to smack it up on my finger, and that's going to put bigger stars on here to make look like stars that are shining brighter, or maybe it's a galaxy in the background. Who knows? But I'll clean up the edges and go ahead and put the last bit of white. And this is really going to help sell that center of the galaxy that all the stars wrap up around the massive black hole. So now I have to put a cool logo on this. I'm going to use my airbrush and some stencils I made, and I go ahead and tape it, and I start spraying. And then I lose all of my footage. I don't know what happened. It just disappeared. So this is the finished. What I really did is I put white first, and then I added red to help cover that because black on red is not going to go well. So now that I have that covered, I noticed an issue with my Vallejo paints. Since they're a little bit larger, it doesn't close appropriately. So I'm going to take that bottom out, and I'm going to take some of the foam away so it will compress a little bit more and help save some space. So after I do that, I put it in, and it works a little bit. I'm going to play with some ideas, but that part's not finished in my mind. While that paint dries and adheres to the plastic, I'm going to go ahead and open it back up, and we're going to work on creating the holder in the case. Since we have the base already made, the only thing we have to do is go ahead and put the sides on. With this, you can just use hot glue, put it around the edges, and that's going to hold well enough to not fall apart. Now afterwards, I'm going to put some pins in just for a little bit more peace of mind. Make sure it doesn't fall apart. And we're going to go ahead and test fit it again. And it looks good, so we're going to go ahead and take everything out again and put hot glue on the bottom of the foam. And that's just going to make sure that the foam doesn't come out itself. I don't put too much because I don't want to melt it. I don't really know what the melting temperature of this foam is, but I didn't want to find out this late. So after that, I go ahead and put the miniature holder and put hot glue all around and push it down. And I can call this done. Let's go ahead and put the paints in, my miniatures, a couple of varnishes, and my brushes. And this case is pretty much ready to go. One more test just to show you how well it works. With everything in, we're going to close it up, and we're going to give it a good old shake up. And we're going to shake it up and down and around, and we're going to smack it, blah, blah. And we're going to open it up, and let's see how well it did in there. Heck yeah. I'm so happy that this worked so well. One of these doesn't hold very well, but I can work with that. It's a mild problem. So we're going to get some epoxy and we're going to pour it on the top. I ended up making 2 batches because the first batch had too much purple, so much so that it only needed to dip a little bit and mix it into my new batch to give it the purple I wanted. We'll level out the case and we'll go ahead and pour some epoxy. You might be tempted to want to pour it all in, but what might happen is you might pour too much and then it starts overflowing and you get a mess. So go ahead and pour a little and start spreading it around with a popsicle stick, paying attention to the edges, um, and adding as you need. But luckily, I didn't add any more because it was just the perfect amount. And this is going to make sure my decal and my case have extra protection. I would have done it on the back, but it doesn't have a dip, it more goes up. So I can't do it on the back. Now with the lighter here, I'm going to hover it over the epoxy, and what that does is actually pops the bubbles and gives it that clear glass look. I do this a couple more times, and this is the product the next day. As you can see, super hard, resistant to most scratches, and I feel safe taking this to a convention to paint.
Hey guys, thanks for joining me for this episode of Just Gonna Craft It. I hope you had fun watching me build this, because I had a lot of fun building it as well. And I hope this inspires you to make one similar, and I hope to see a couple of people that have this case at ReaperCon. Until next time, always remember, if you want something cool for yourself, sometimes you just gotta craft it. See you next time.